last time slot, and he has graciously just been shuffled around all day today, and I feel like I have been apologizing to him and his wife and the folks here from Touch the World because they've just been very gracious to us in just allowing us to have flaws. So I wanted to introduce Jesse. Jesse and I actually grew up in the same church. He was the punk kid in the back of the aisle that would pull my hair, and his dad was the pastor. And he has grown into a fine man of God, and I'm proud to introduce you. Jesse has blazed his own path from our small town, Blairstown, New Jersey. Blairstown is in the house. Can I get some people up in here from Blairstown? Thank you. And he has trailed from Blairstown to other adventures that ultimately led him to Touch the World and working in Uganda with his lovely wife, Andrea. He's an adoptive father, and his latest adventure has taken him back right where you started, to the Northeast, and he's now serving as director of Touch the World. Would you join me in welcoming Jesse Cruz?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now, let's be clear, I was supposed to be before Bishop Martin, so I might need to do a little bit of this to bring the extra passion to finish us off today. But I'm happy to be here with you. Like Elizabeth said, I'm from Touch the World. Our vision is we're a gospel-centered ministry looking to transform people's lives through local and global mission opportunities. So we're a mission organization. I have a huge passion for missions, which started in my junior year of high school when I went on my first mission trip down to Mexico. And God just transformed my world. He opened up my eyes to new realities, being exposed for the first time to orphans and the vulnerable and the marginalized. He took us from that journey and called my wife to Africa. We told him anywhere but Africa, and God has a funny way of doing that, so don't say that. He will take you where you don't want to go. We ended up in Africa for 5 years and further developed just this deep passion for orphans and those on the margins of society. I guess that's why I'm here today. I am not an expert in this topic. I don't think many of us are, but it is encouraging to be with like-minded people who can enter into this conversation of what it means to try and figure out where we all fit in this adoption and orphan really crisis that we're trying to fill the gap on and trying to figure out where we belong. I am here with my wife Andrea, and we're excited to be here with you today. We have adopted, as Elizabeth said, my 10-year-old oldest daughter, Paulina. We adopted her from Uganda, and that was quite a journey, a 3-year-long journey that we started 3.5 years ago and just finished up this past year in April. So that was a long journey for us, and we had kind of the perspective of coming from the other side of adopting her in country, which gave us some unique perspectives that I'm going to share with you today. We also have a 2.5-year-old daughter, Kaylee, and a 5-month-old baby boy that you've heard a little bit in the back. And so we also resonate with the foster care community. When we were in Uganda, we had a 16 and 18-year-old girl and boy living with us during that whole time, so we can understand that perspective. So let's dive in. For those of you that have been on the news of the adoption movement and orphan care, you may have seen Uganda on the radar. It's been under scrutiny lately from the international community, looking at some red flags that have really come up of unethical practices in orphan care and adoption. Some of those red flags, they range anywhere from when we first moved to Uganda, there were about 10 orphanages. Now there's over 100. That could be a good thing, but we also look at the side that there's 100 orphanages. They know that there's demand, and so are there orphans that aren't truly orphans in those orphanages? Other red flags include that parents have a misunderstanding of what adoption even means. So people say, let us take your child and put them in an orphanage. And when they hear the word adoption, when that's translated, it actually means just taking care of a child for a temporary amount of time. So children have been adopted to America or another place, and then later the family starts knocking on the door and saying, where's my child? All the way to the immense amount of corruption that happens in country in most of these majority world countries. So I'm here today to try and bring a little bit of that perspective of the international community about what's going on overseas? What are some of those red flags? What are some of those concerns so that we can enter into this with eyes wide open? That's the title of what I've given my message today. But this is something that we need to look at, and it is of great concern to us when we were in the process, this 3-year-long process. We did a lot of research, and again, Uganda started to get on the map of some of these realities coming to light. My wife did extensive research on the topic, and actually she should probably be the one up here sharing with you, but I was the one appointed, so I'm praying that God will speak through me and through our experiences. We saw it from the other side. We saw it through the Ugandan cultural lens that really gave us a very unique perspective on what's happening, what I would say not just in Uganda, but probably in most international locations. So let's start this conversation. I want to bring 3 points to us of how we can have our eyes open to some of the realities of orphan care. And the first one that I want to challenge us with is just re-looking at even how we interpret different words. We're going to take this one word, orphan, because that's what we're focusing on. Right? We take the word orphan, what comes to mind? What do you think of? What mental picture, what word association would you put there? What emotions come up inside of you? Orphan. Take a couple seconds. Just think about that. Orphan. Some of the words you might think of. Vulnerable, abandoned, neglected. You might have a picture in your mind of a little girl that has been tossed aside from her family, and she has no family, she has nobody to care for her, no love. You might feel even within yourself anger. I think a lot of us have felt that. You see the situation and you're just angry at it. How could God allow this to happen? You wrestle with God, you're angry with God. You want to put your fists up and say, God, how could you allow this? What's going on? A lot of those same reactions are the very reactions that I have also. I think that's probably why most of us are here. Those images, those emotional responses, the things that we've seen, the things that we've heard that have challenged us to get involved. But dare I suggest that this perspective may be a perspective from a privileged culture such as ours that only has to come in contact with orphans and the vulnerable and the marginalized when we choose to.
Go on.
I don't know if this is the perspective all around the world. We get to pick and choose when we encounter the orphan, when we encounter the marginalized. Most of us are living in communities where we are so bubbled from this segment of population that we've insulated ourselves so that we get to choose when and when not to be confronted with the realities. The majority world, and when I say majority world, what I mean is the third world. In the international community, we've switched our language because third world somehow gives the impression that you're less than the first world. You're not as good. And so we've said first world, second world, third world. So the third world, we're changing that terminology. Change it with me, please. We call them the majority world because the reality is they are the majority. Okay? They are the 10%. They're the 90% of the population living with 10% of the resources. We're the 10% of the population, or 1%, living with 90% of the resources. They are the majority. We are not normal. Do we get that? I don't think I do. I think I'm normal, right? Don't you think you're normal? We're surrounded by people that are like us, and so therefore we think the rest of the world is like us, and that is not true. Let's open our eyes to this reality that we are not normal. The rest of the world is somehow normal. The poverty that they live in, the vulnerable, the marginalized, this is somehow normal. Sad, yes, but normal. If I were to ask my Ugandan friends what their perspective is on this word orphan, I might hear some vastly different comments from them. I may hear words such as that an orphan would be a burden, that they would be a nuisance, that they would even be some sort of a money maker. All right, I've heard these things, and it's not hard. It's not an easy thing to accept, but to see it from their perspective, with the amount of orphans that they deal with every day that are in their face, This is the view of the international community by and large. This is very much a stereotype, okay? There's a lot of great friends that I have in Uganda that are caring for the widow, caring for the orphan. Ugandans are caring for their own. So this is not a derogatory against, but it is an overwhelming, okay, segment of the population that views them in this way. And it's certainly hard to imagine. In Uganda, let me just share a few stories. When we first got there, we were loosely partnered with an orphanage that was also a school. And when we first got involved with them, we thought our visions were very similar. Caring for the orphan, loving on them, creating a family-type situation rather than an institutionalized orphanage. And we strove towards that as we got deeper and deeper into it and had more and more experiences and got our feet really wet into the ministry there. We started to uncover and kind of pull away the dark corners of what was really going on and what we really saw. And we saw that their definition of an orphanage or an orphan was vastly different than our definition. And they were using our definition as privileged Westerners, and really what even I would argue should be a biblical perspective that everybody should have on the orphan, right? What we talked about, they're vulnerable, they're cast out, and we should be caring for them. So I don't think we're that far off, but they're in a way exploiting our definition of what an orphanage is, and very much taking that and using that to their advantage, making money off of it. Let me give you one example. When we started there were maybe, let me just say there were about 100 orphans there being cared for. We were able to raise some funds and put some money towards that school and say we're gonna care for about 40 of these. Well, because there were 100, that money very obviously, we even knew this, it's kind of a slush fund, right? You're improving their life, but it gets distributed throughout all of the 100 kids. And that was great because we were hoping to get the rest of the 60, enough money so that we could really support the whole orphanage. In that process, about 2-3 days after we supported the 40, we started to see more and more orphans start to come. And what they did was they went out and they got more orphans because they knew our definition of an orphan, and they knew that when they could tug on the heartstrings of Westerners, that in our ignorance we would just give and give and give without knowing what the real situation is. They didn't truly care for the orphans. That money never actually made a difference. Okay? In our time there, a segment of these orphans were asked to be pulled out of school, and they were in a way forced. They liked doing it, but not all of them. They were forced to sing and dance when there was a performance set up where they could go out and perform and make money. The orphans within the school were told, you have to do this. Okay? You don't matter. You have no parents. You're not valuable. If you don't do this, you can't stay in our school. And so they were forced to sing and dance up to 12 hours long a day. This was one of the things that when we first saw this was kind of the thing that ticked us off, because we're just looking at these kids and you're talking about 100-degree weather, no water breaks, and they have to just keep on dancing and singing and getting ready for this performance, taking a stick to the back every time they did something wrong. And this was the ideology, right? Take the kids out, they're money makers. We're going to use them because they're just thrown aside. They're just a nuisance. They're neglected. But we're going to use that to our advantage. We tried to get out of that very quickly, and we did. This is one story. A girl that we met there, her name was Lillian. This is one of the girls that we started fostering. She's 16 now. We got to know her when she was about 13. And she came from the northern region of Uganda in a place called Gulu. And this was a war-torn region, about 22 years of war that's been going on. It's where we would eventually move to. And just a huge crisis of orphans because of the ongoing war that was happening there. And Lillian was one of these children that came down as a result of the war. She saw her father die right in front of her eyes at the hands of the rebels. Her mother, she was told that later that day in the scramble, had also died. Her uncle, within the next day, took her and her brothers and sisters and many other kids, pulled them out, brought them down to this orphanage in the big city where we were loosely partnered with, and that's where we got to know Lillian from. Years later, after we took her into our home, we decided to go back to her village to try and reconnect her. This was after the war. And so we went back to the village and we found her auntie was there. And she was so happy to see her auntie again. It had been years and years since she had been back. Well, come to find out, we left her there over a weekend and she came home and she said, "The auntie is my mother." And we're all trying to make sense of this, trying to figure out what this means. Now you have a 16-year-old girl who at that time was 13, this probably happened when she was about 10, with her father dying right in front of her, was told that her parents had died. Now her father had, but traumatized little girl, told that her mother had died. And what had happened as we uncovered it was that her mother had basically told the orphanage that she's the auntie in order that she might have a better chance at life. She neglected her own child because she didn't feel like she could provide for her. Lillian ended up finding out that this is her mother. Her mother has AIDS and basically may die any day, but we've been able to continue to care for her, and it's been redeeming in a way for her just to find out that she had a mother. But it goes to show the extent that people will go to see a better future for their child, even to the extent of neglecting them. There was another young man that was in this orphanage that we met. He used to sing and dance for a very well-known African children's choir that toured all around, even here in the U.S. And he said that when he was involved and they only used orphans and tried to promote this children's choir, saying, you know, this is a pro-orphan, we're trying to reach out to the vulnerable, we're trying to help these kids in their future, and that was the whole mantra, and they raised a lot of money. Well, this young man, he never benefited at all from this endeavor, yet he was asked to sit there and plaster a smile on his face, and if he at all didn't do that, he would be replaced by the next orphan in line, or again, abused and beaten with sticks. And, you know, it's just widespread, and we see that over and over. And the sad reality, I want you to hear this, the sad reality is that when something as little as $100 is waved in front of the face of somebody entangled in extreme poverty, even the most well-intentioned person will crumble. This is part of we might not get this from a minority world perspective, right? The majority world deals with this over and over every day. You have parents that all you have to do is wave a $100 bill in front of their face and they'll deny their child. Is it because they don't love them? No. But because they can't physically provide for them. And they're looking for any opportunity for assistance, even if it means sending them away and neglecting them. It's a sad reality. Okay, as we enter into this difficult conversation, I understand I'm bringing a very different side to this conversation, which is hard, and I want to kind of get through what I want to get through and actually open this up for questions if there are issues, because I think it can create some good discussion, really understanding what's going on. But as we enter this, we have to have our eyes open to the fact that orphan does not mean the same thing all around the world to each and every person. Okay, entering in with ignorance, with the idea that an orphan is an orphan, will only work against us in understanding the tragic consequences that can happen within families. Number 2, we need to keep our eyes open to the necessity to prevent orphans from existing before adoption even becomes an option.
Amen.
Okay, it's very exciting to see this culture of adoption developing in the church, and it's so necessary. I'm going to kind of wrap up with coming back to that. But I think we can't neglect the causes that have created so many orphans. And I know even in creating this culture of adoption, Elizabeth has talked a lot about, we need to really get back and look at the foundation and the prevention side and talk about that just as much as, well, what are we going to do now that they're there? We can't neglect these causes. If anyone must relinquish their child because they can't feed, care, educate, or provide for them, then the Christian church must rise up and fight against this injustice. We have to wage war against this. Listen, if anybody loves their child, but yet is forced to give them up because they can't just feed, provide, or educate them, but they love them, shouldn't we as Christians rise up and wage war against that? I mean,
Yes.
what an injustice
Amen.
is that? So let's get back to the basics here and look at the whole picture. This is a holistic thing we're viewing. The church needs to find ways to support families right here in our backyard, globally, internationally, domestically. I don't care where it is. Families. God instituted the family. And that's the holistic part of this beautiful thing that we're looking at, called adoption and orphan care. We've heard a lot of great avenues. I don't need to repeat them all. The sponsorship programs, microfinance organizations, the anti-trafficking organizations. There's so many ways to get involved, and they all do connect. This is part of a bigger picture. We need to take a holistic approach to transforming communities with the power of the gospel. That's the core. When we lived in Africa, I served as the country director for our branch there, and we worked in this region called Gulu that I talked about, where Lillian came from, where it was ravaged by 22 years of war. And we worked right alongside the people there. There were hundreds of children that were abandoned and orphaned probably overnight with this rebel group that came through. And so working in these conditions, and we've heard this a lot, this has kind of been a theme, it is messy. It is traumatizing. I can honestly say we needed counseling when we got back. Every missionary, I think, coming off the field needs serious counseling. We were traumatized working in this situation, and it is messy. There are no easy answers. Going there, we engaged in community development. That was our model, really trying to build into the local community. And in my opinion, I do think that's the best place to start, is looking at a long-term relationship. This is not a shot in the dark, one-time effort. These are not one-off projects that we're doing. We need to get down, dirty, messy. We need to look at long-term relationships. I think wherever something is nationally led and driven by community, that's the best option we have. I mean, there's no clear-cut answers. When we went there, I researched extensively community development models. How do you go into a community, and what are the models that you can put in place so that this thing works? You know, the nice A to Z model. Give it to me. And I read a lot of models. None of them worked. Okay? It is different wherever you are. And this is for all of us, whatever you're engaged in, whether adoption, and we even see this as we talk together as adoptive families, right? One person's situation could be vastly different than another's, but somehow we come together and we network and we figure it out. It is messy. It's moving. There is no science to it, but we're a part of it. The foundation is a biblical worldview, right? We got to help these communities overcome the patterns that create orphans. And that's where we start from.
Amen.
This is a long and tiresome ministry, but it's the work that we have to do to influence communities to make better decisions that will ultimately eradicate this crisis that we're dealing with. If we want to care for the orphan, we need to start from doing everything possible to prevent them even from existing. Okay, so we need to keep our eyes open for ministry partners, where we can connect, how we can get involved, and really we can't focus on